Have you been struggling to feel God's presence? If so, stay tuned and I will teach you how to reconnect with God today. What is going on, everyone? We are back for another episode of Prospering with Christ. I hope that you had a wonderful week last week, and I hope that this week will be just as amazing to you as well. So for today's episode, we are discussing what to do when you feel disconnected from God. And I really wanted to talk about this today because this was something that I personally experienced when I was in a dark season a couple months ago. And it is really hard going from a place where you feel like God is your best friend. You feel like you can hear God clearly. You feel like God talks to you every single day on a daily basis to not hearing anything from him at all. And one of the main things that I learned while I was in this season is that while we are on our journey with God, while we are on our walk with Christ, we will not always feel connected to God. We will not always feel his presence. We will not always be able to hear him or discern him speaking to us. Sometimes we might feel alone. Sometimes we might feel like he's not there. And normally when these feelings come, it is not in the moments where everything is going good. It is not in the moments where you feel happy, you feel joy, you feel like life is amazing. Normally, when you start feeling this disconnection from God, it is in the moments where you feel like you need him the most. It is in the moments where times are hard. It is in the moments where you feel like you are in the middle of a storm. It is in the moments where you feel like you want to give up, where you want to lay down and die. It is in the moments where you need God's help. You need to hear him. You need to feel him. Sometimes it's not just about him getting you out of the situation. Sometimes you just need him to comfort you in this season. You need to feel like you're not going through it alone. You need to feel like God is with you and you don't feel that. And it makes this season, it makes this struggle 10 times harder for you. When we are in a tough season and we are going through a struggle and we feel like we are disconnected from God, we start to think that God has abandoned us. We start to think that God doesn't care about our circumstances and that God doesn't care about us. And when those feelings start arising, we open doors for the devil to attack us. And I don't mean attack us through our circumstances and hardships. I mean attack us through our thoughts. He'll start putting thoughts into your head telling you that God doesn't care about you. If God really loved you, why would he allow you to go through this? And not only is he allowing you to go through this, but he's not even answering you when you're calling on him. Why would God make you beg him for an answer? Why would God make you beg him to feel his presence? Why would God make you beg him to help you? God doesn't care about you. These are the types of thoughts that the devil is going to put inside your head. Why? Because he wants to change your perspective of God. He wants you to believe the lies that he's telling you. He wants you to turn away from God. He wants you to hate God. He wants to ruin your relationship with God. He doesn't like the fact that you and God are close. He doesn't like the fact that you are living for Christ. He doesn't like the fact that you are following God's lead. So if he can get you to change your perspective of God, if he can get you to turn on God, then he got you. But you have to push past the devil's tactics. Even though you don't understand what's going on, even though you don't understand where God is and you can't feel him and you can't hear him, you have to push past the devil's tactics and trust that God has never left you. I want you to think of the story of Job. In the book of Job, God allowed the devil to attack Job. Job went through one of the worst seasons that we have ever seen or read about in the Bible. And if you pay attention to what was happening in the book of Job, you'll realize that Job was crying out to God the entire time that this book took place. He kept telling God that he didn't understand. He was angry with God. He was venting his frustrations. He was questioning God. And if you notice, God never answered him. God never answered him until the end of the chapter, until the end when he finally restored him. But through the entire week or 2 weeks or however long Job was going through this season, he did not hear from God. He did not feel God. God was quiet. But even though God was quiet, he was still there. He was still listening. That's why when he finally spoke to Job at the end of the chapter, he provided answers to everything that Job had been asking him all week, that everything Job had been questioning him about all week. How could he provide answers if he wasn't there? Because he was there the entire time. He was listening the entire time. Even though Job didn't feel him, even though Job didn't understand why he was going through this, even though Job couldn't hear him at first, God was still by his side. And just like he was with Job, you have to understand that although you don't feel God, although you don't hear God, although you feel disconnected from God, God is still by your side. Just because he's not speaking does not mean he's not there. Just because you can't feel him does not mean he's not in your presence. Do not fall for the devil's tactics. Do not allow your lack of understanding to make you jeopardize your relationship with God, to make you jeopardize your breakthrough, because you're going by what you feel, you're going by what you hear, and you're going by what the devil is telling you, and you don't understand what God is doing. Sometimes there are things that causes us to feel this disconnection from God. And one of the main things that causes us to feel disconnected from God is our circumstances and our emotions. Sometimes the emotions that you feel can push you away from God. I want you to think about it like this. Have you ever had a moment in your life where you felt angry, you felt frustrated, you felt peed off, like you were extremely mad? And that anger caused you to react and do things that you normally wouldn't do. It caused you to react and do things that people might judge you and view you as crazy for. But you know that the way that you reacted in that moment was not your character. It was not how you walk around acting. The way that you were treating people in that moment is not how you treat people on a daily basis, but you were reacting out of an emotion. And while you're thinking about that moment when you were angry, I want you to ask yourself, where was God in the moment? Were you even thinking about him? Were you even seeking him? Were you even bothering him? Were you even looking for him? Majority of the time when we're angry, we're not even seeking God. And that's why we don't hear him. That's why we don't feel him, because that emotion, that anger, that frustration is blocking him from getting to us. And we're so clouded by the emotion. We're so clouded by how we're feeling in that moment that we don't even notice that God isn't there. We don't even notice that God isn't speaking. We don't even care to act in the image of God in that moment. Sometimes our emotions cloud our judgment and pushes us away from God. And you might be wondering, what does your circumstance have to do with that? Well, your circumstance can bring certain emotions out of you. If you're going through a tough season, you might feel frustrated. You might feel sad. You might feel depressed. And those negative emotions is clouding you from reaching God, is clouding God from getting to you. Your emotions and your circumstances can even be affecting the way that you're seeking God. Because I can tell you from experience, when I was going through my season, every single time that I sought God, I was not seeking him happily. I was seeking him frustrated. My patience was very low, to the point where if he didn't speak to me by the time I was done praying, I was extremely irritated with him. And these types of emotions can cause a blockage between you and God. It can stop God from getting to you, because every single time that your patience is low and you're getting irritated, you're pushing him away. He can no longer get to you. And we also have to understand that God is not meant to work on our time. We are meant to work on his. We do not dictate when God speaks. We do not dictate how God speaks. So when we approach God, we have to approach him from a humble place. We have to approach him with a humble spirit. We have to approach him as a servant. And we cannot allow the things that are happening in our lives and the way that those things are making us feel block us and stop us from connecting with God. Block us and stop us from discerning God. I understand that it's hard, but you're going to have to push through how you're feeling. You're going to have to push through the circumstance that you're experiencing, and you're going to have to keep pursuing God and pursue him from a place of peace. Pursue him from a place of humbleness. Vent out your frustrations, calm down, then seek God. Another thing that causes us to feel disconnected from God is our lack of discernment. See, we may feel disconnected from God because we don't even know who's speaking to us. Every time we hear something, every time we get an idea, every time we feel something, we don't know if that's us, God, the devil, the world. Like, we don't know who is speaking to us. And our lack of discernment makes it really hard for us to connect with God. And this was actually something that I experienced when I was going through my dark season a couple months ago, because I used to be the type of person who heard from God all the time. Like there was not a day that went by that God did not speak to me. But when I went through this season, I felt disconnected from God. I couldn't hear him. No matter how hard I tried, I just could not get God to speak to me. And I got to a point where I felt like I was begging God to say something to me. And so when God finally started speaking to me again, I used to have anxiety every single time he spoke because I did not know if it was him, if it was me, if it was the devil, if somebody was playing a trick on me, if I was tripping. Like I would overthink every single time that he spoke to me. I went from a place to knowing with confidence when God was saying something to me to questioning every single thing that I heard because I didn't have reassurance that God was speaking to me. And one thing that I learned while I was going through that season is that if you are in a place where you are struggling to discern God's voice, maybe you are just now starting your Christian walk and you don't understand when God is speaking to you, or maybe you are a seasoned Christian, but you went through a dark road, you went through a dark journey, and now you're on a path of questioning God again. No matter the reason why you're struggling with discernment, if you are struggling with discernment, then you need to get in God's presence. You need to start connecting with God. That is a key sign that God has become something that is unfamiliar to you. I want you to think about a relationship that you have with someone who is close to you. It could be someone that you live with, like your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, your spouse. Think about your relationship with them. When you talk to them, when you have conversations with them, isn't the conversations completely different than the conversations that you would have with a coworker at work or a stranger who's working at the store that you're shopping at? Yes, it is. But why is that? Because you are more familiar with your mother, your spouse, your cousin, your brother, your sister. You're more familiar with them. The more familiar you become to someone, the more comfortable you become around them, the more you understand them, the more you get to know them, the more you recognize their voice. See, the reason why it's hard for you to discern God is because he has become unfamiliar to you. You need to learn him again. You need to reconnect with him again. You need to build up your relationship with him again. You need to get around him more. I know it's hard because you feel disconnected. You feel like God isn't speaking to you. You feel like you can't feel his presence anymore. But the more you come around, the more you keep pursuing, the more you keep seeking, the more you will find him, the more familiar he will become to you. Do not allow lack of discernment to keep you disconnected from God. Start getting in his presence and becoming familiar with him again. Start learning his voice so that every time he speaks, you know it's him. Another reason why we might feel disconnected from God is because sometimes God takes a step back and he watches us from a distance. He's not right there with us, but he's still close enough to see us. And you may be wondering, why would he do that? Why would he pull back from us? Why would he take a step back, especially when I'm going through the worst season of my life? But sometimes God takes a step back to protect us from jeopardizing our breakthrough. See, what causes us to experience blessings, what causes us to experience our breakthrough is faith. And sometimes lack of faith will kill your breakthrough. Lack of faith will kill your destiny. And God knows that if he stays too close to you, your lack of faith is going to kill what he's trying to do for you. So he takes a step back. He watches you from a distance. He protects you from a distance. He's there with you from a distance because he cannot let your lack of faith jeopardize what he is trying to do for you. I was reading the book of Exodus last week, and there was something that really stuck out to me. So in the book of Exodus, the Israelites left Egypt and they were in the wilderness and they were supposed to be traveling to the promised land. And Moses wanted God to travel with them, but God said something to Moses that stuck out to me. And if you want to read along, go to Exodus chapter 33, verse 3. It says, "Go up to this land that flows with milk and honey, but I will not travel among you, for you are a stubborn and rebellious people. If I did, I would surely destroy you along the way." What stuck out to me when I was reading this is that God blatantly told Moses, I am not traveling with you and the Israelites because y'all are stubborn, y'all lack faith, y'all are rebellious, y'all don't do what I tell y'all to do, y'all let the circumstances and the things that you see affect what I told you was going to happen, and if I come with you, I'm going to destroy you. God is saying, if I stand right here with you in this season, I am going to destroy the very thing that I promised you. I cannot be right there with you. I have to take a step back. I'm watching you. I'm observing you. I'm protecting you. I'm not going to let anything happen to you, but I am not going to be right there with you. Because if I do, you will not get the things that I promised you. I know it may suck when God takes a step back, but we should actually be happy when he does this because it shows that he loves us so much. He wants this thing for us so much that he's willing to take a step back to protect us from ourselves. And notice I said take a step back because if you notice in the book of Job and also in the book of Exodus, God never left them. He just observed from a distance. He watched from a distance. He followed from a distance. He wasn't right there by their side, but he was still there. God did not leave you. So even if God does take a step back and he watches you from a distance, do not give into the enemy's lies that are telling you that God abandoned you, that are telling you that God doesn't care, that are telling you that God left the room. God is still right here with you. He's just at a distance. That's why you can't feel him. That's why you can't hear him. He's at a distance, but he's still close enough to be here. He's still close enough to see what's going on. He's still close enough to guide you. He's still close enough to protect you. Just because he's at a distance does not mean that he is not here. Are you enjoying this episode so far? Is this episode teaching you what to do when you feel disconnected from God? If so, then I want you to do me 2 favors. Favor number 1, I want you to leave a review and let me and others know how you are enjoying the show. You can leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening to this episode. Leave an honest review and let me and others know how you are enjoying the show. And favor number 2, if you know anyone who is struggling to discern God and feel his presence, maybe they feel disconnected or they feel like God has abandoned them, then I want you to send this episode to them. Let this episode motivate and encourage them the same way that it is motivating and encouraging you. Now let's get back to the show. Just because you cannot feel God, that does not mean that he is not there. Sometimes God likes to move in silence. And for those of you who don't know what moving in silence means, it means that you don't walk around telling everybody your plans. Majority of the people who are around you, the people who are closest to you, don't even have any idea that you have been working on the things that you've been working on. You just pop out with it. You don't tell people what you're doing. You tell them what you did. You don't tell people what you're trying to do. You tell them what you accomplished. Sometimes God likes to just pop out with things. He doesn't like to tell you every single thing. He doesn't like to tell you every single thing he's doing. He doesn't like to give you the entire plan. He just wants you to trust him. He is saying, trust me. Do you trust me? Do you trust that I know what's best for you? Do you trust that I love you? Do you trust that I will never forsake you? Do you trust that I will never lead you to things that will disappoint you? Do you trust that everything I do is for your good? Do you trust that my plans are better than any plan you or anyone else can create? Do you trust me when I say that this is going to work out for your good? God is saying, I don't need to tell you everything I'm doing. Sometimes I want to move in silence because if I told you the entire plan, if I told you everything I was thinking, if I told you exactly how this was going to work out, why would you need to trust me? What would you need to have faith for? What would you need to hold on to hope for? I want you to prove your trust to me. There was a reason why God wasn't speaking when Job was begging and crying out to him. God worked it out for his good because that's what he planned to do the moment that he allowed Satan to do everything that he did to Job. But while Job was going through it, he sat there silent. He didn't tell Job why it happened. He didn't tell Job what was going to happen at the end of the road. He didn't tell Job all the blessings he had in store for him. He didn't tell Job how he was going to restore him. He moved in silence. Sometimes God likes to move in silence. He doesn't like to let you know everything that he is doing. He just wants you to have faith. He wants you to trust him. Are you going to trust him? Do you trust that although you don't feel him, although you don't hear him, although you don't understand him, you know that what he's doing is for your good. You know that you're going to make it out of this. You know that everything is going to work out. Do you trust him? Do you trust God's silent moves? Put your trust in God because God knows what he's doing. And have you ever thought that maybe the reason why God is allowing this disconnection to happen is because he wants you to pursue him harder? He wants you to seek him harder. He said that you have become comfortable. You have become complacent. You have become okay with the type of relationship that y'all have. But in order for you to really step into this next season, I'm going to need you to come harder. I'm going to need you to seek me harder. I'm going to need you to read your Bible more. I'm going to need you to pray more. I'm going to need you to fast more. I'm not allowing the disconnect because I want you to give up. I'm not allowing the disconnect because I don't like you and I don't care about your problems and I abandoned you. I'm allowing the disconnect because I want you to come harder. I want you to think about when a child gets lost from their parent. Maybe they went to the store and they walked away and now they can't find mommy or daddy. What do? Do they stay complacent? Do they leave the store and go home with someone else? Or do they run around the store in a panic looking for their parents, looking for the person they're familiar with? They seek harder. They're looking harder. They're chasing harder. They're working harder. And God is saying, if you feel disconnected from me, if you feel like you can't hear me or sense my presence, then that is a sign that you need to pursue me harder. You need to be like that lost child in the store and come search for me. Find me, deepen that connection, get familiar with me again, pursue me harder. And as you do this, this is going to build strength in you. And not only is it going to strengthen you, but it's also going to test you. It's going to test your faith and see how much you really trust God. See how much you really love God. See how much you really surrender to God. See, one thing that I learned is that it's so easy to say that you love God, that you have faith, that you trust God when everything is going right. But what about the moments when everything is going wrong? What about the moments when everything is going wrong and you can't even hear God? You can't even feel God. You're praying and praying and praying and seeking him for instructions. You're seeking him to guide you. You're seeking him for help, and you feel like you are getting nothing in return. Are you going to stay down in those moments? Are you going to stay loyal in those moments? Are you going to have faith in those moments? Those are the moments that are going to really test your faith. Not the moments when everything is going good. Not the moments where you feel like God is blessing you with everything you could have imagined. Not the moments where you are successful and you are happy. But what about the moments when you are down? What about the moments where you feel like you are alone? What about the moments where you feel like you are showing up in your partnership with God, but God is turning his back on you? That's going to really test your faith. And sometimes God allows this season of us feeling disconnected from him because he wants to see if you actually practice what you preach. Do you really trust him, or do you just say that? Do you really have faith, or are you just saying that? Do you really love him, or are you just saying that? Do you stop showing up to the relationship when things get bad? Do you stop praying when you feel like God isn't answering? Do you stop reading your Bible because of your circumstance? God may be putting you through this season. God may be allowing this disconnection to happen because he's trying to test you. He's trying to see if you practice the things that you preach. He's trying to see if you're about the things that you say. No matter why this disconnection is happening, you have to hold on to the fact that God is still here. It doesn't matter if he's at a distance. It doesn't matter if he took a step back. It doesn't matter if he's trying to protect you from jeopardizing what he's trying to do for you. He did not leave you. He did not abandon you. He is still here. He is watching from a distance. You may not feel him, but he's still following you. You may not feel him, but he's still observing you. You may not feel him, but he's still protecting you. He is still here with you. Do not allow the enemy to lie to you. Do not allow this season of feeling disconnected make you turn away from God. Use my story as motivation, because I felt disconnected from God to a point where I was practically begging him to say something to me. And just a couple months later, here I am hearing from God again. Here I am having God speak to me even as I'm sitting down recording this episode. If he will do it for me, he will do it for you. So let's talk about how to start reconnecting our relationship with God even after we felt a disconnection. If you want to rebuild your connection with God, you are going to have to continue praying and seeking him. Even in the moments where you don't feel his presence, pray, seek him. Even in the moments where you feel like he is not saying anything back to you, pray, seek him. Even in the moments where you feel like this is a waste of your time, because trust me, I've been there. There have been moments where I have been praying and I got so frustrated feeling like, why am I even setting aside time to pray when God is clearly not speaking back to me? God clearly does not care, but you have to push through all those emotions and you have to continue to seek, because eventually you will find. You might not find it the first time. You might not find it the second time. You might not find it the fifth time, but as you keep seeking, you will find. So do not stop seeking God. Continue praying, continue fasting, continue reading your Bible. Continue looking for him. Continue to get familiar with him. And eventually you will start connecting with him again. Eventually you will start discerning him again. Eventually you will start feeling his presence again. You have to continue seeking him. I know that I keep referencing the story of Job, but the story of Job is a perfect example of being in a good place, falling down, feeling disconnected from God, and then getting everything restored again, even his relationship with God. And if you pay attention in the story of Job, you will notice that even though God was not answering Job throughout the whole 40 chapters until the last chapter, even though God was not answering Job, Job kept asking questions. Even though Job was frustrated, even though Job couldn't hear God, even though Job didn't understand why everything was happening, throughout the entire book, he kept asking questions. He kept seeking God. He kept asking for understanding. He kept asking why this was happening. He kept trying to clear and defend himself. He never stopped seeking. And eventually he got an answer. Eventually God spoke back to him. That is the proof right there that if you continue to pray, if you continue to seek, you will find God. God will provide an answer and you can start rebuilding your connection and rebuilding your relationship with him. The second thing that you want to do to rebuild your relationship with God is you want to get into a place where you are relaxed and at peace before you pray. Because like I said, anger, frustration, being peed off, being sad, being depressed, like all those emotions can cloud your judgment and make it hard for you to discern God. Even if you're in a place where you feel anxious, you feel impatient, you feel like you need an answer now and you're not willing to wait. Get to a place where you calm down and relax before you go in God's presence. And I know that may sound tricky because I talk a lot about how you should vent to God, right? But there's a difference between venting and seeking God from a place of negative emotions. When you are venting, you are telling God how you're feeling, you're casting your cares onto him, and you're giving it to him. You're asking him to help you. But when you seek God from a place of those feelings, you're not asking him for his help. You're reacting to him based off how you're feeling. You're reacting to him based off your circumstance. And so there's nothing wrong with venting to God. There's nothing wrong with letting it out. There's nothing wrong with asking him to help you. And if that's what you want to do, okay. But if you're not going to God to vent about this and asking him for help, then you want to get to a place where you calm down, you relax, you're at peace, you're not anxious, you're not angry, you're not sad, and then seek him, because now you're in a clear state of mind. The third thing that you can do to rebuild your connection with God is you can try to talk to God about other things that's not pertaining your main desire. You may notice that God might not answer you about the thing you're necessarily seeking him on, but if you start talking to him about other things, he might start responding to you over those things. And this was something that God was doing to me. Like one of the main things that I was seeking him on months ago was finances. And no matter how hard I tried, he would not answer me about that. But if I sought him on something like, what hairstyle should I wear? Should I do this? Should I go here? How do I do that? Like just random stuff. He would answer those things. And I started to get frustrated because I was like, why are you answering me about these things? And these things are simple, but I have a major problem in my life, aka my finances, and you're not saying anything at all about that. But like I said, God's ways are different than our ways. And so we might not always understand why God does the things that he does in a way that he does them. And so Yes, God started off answering me over things that was simple and things that didn't pertain to my main problem. But eventually I did start to rebuild my relationship with him. I did start to feel connected to him again. And then he started answering me over the things that I was praying for, over the things that was a problem in my life, over the things that I really needed help on. So try to pray and talk to him about things that's not pertaining your problems, things that's not pertaining what you've been seeking him on, and see if he starts responding to you in those areas, because that will help you continue to discern his voice and build your connection with him. Another thing that you can do, and this is honestly one of my most favorite things, is keep a track list of when God responds to you. The way that this works is basically every single time God responds to you, you want to write down what he says and also date what he says. And the reason why you want to do this is because sometimes God does speak to us, and he speaks to us more than what we realize. And we just forget. Like, God could have spoke to you last week, right? But you forgot. And so this week you're in this bad mood and you feel disconnected from him, and you feel like God hasn't said anything to you, but you forgot that he said something to you last week. So if you're keeping track of God's responses, you may realize that God is speaking to you more than you realize. So keep a track list. You can write down the things that you said to God or the things that you asked God. Write his response. And next to his response, you want to write the date of when he said it. You might realize that God spoke to you 5 times this month while you've been sitting here thinking that you ain't heard from God in 4 months. Keep a track list of what God said to you. And if you need help with this, or you need an example of like what a track list to God looks like, check out the Royal Faith Journal. I will have it linked in the description of this episode. In the Royal Faith Journal, I actually have a track list included in it, and it's basically helping you keep track of when God answered your prayers, and also date when he answered your prayers as well. So it will give you a clear example of what it looks like to keep track of what God is saying to you and what God is doing for you. So no matter what the reason is as to what's causing the disconnect that you're feeling with God, whether it's your emotions and your circumstance, it's your lack of discernment, or it's God stepping back, if you continue to pray and seek him, relax before you seek him in prayer, talk to him about different things, and keep a track list of what God says back to you, you will start rebuilding your connection with God. And so my challenge for you this week is to take some time to relax and spend in prayer with God. And whatever God says back to you, I want you to write it down and date it. Keep track of God's responses so that you can start rebuilding your connection with him. And so that is all I have for you today. I want to thank you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed what you heard, then make sure that you subscribe so that you get a notification every time a new episode is released. Also, leave a review and let me and others know how you enjoyed the show. And if you want to stay connected with me, make sure that you follow me on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and Facebook at Prospering with Christ. But that is all I have for you today, and I will see you next week.